Caitlin Clark lived in a small, quiet town where everyone knew each other's names. She was a college student with big dreams but an even bigger personality. Her professors often described her as sharp-witted and outspoken, traits that made her stand out in class discussions. Caitlin had a knack for pointing out flaws in arguments, whether it was during a debate about history or a casual conversation at the coffee shop. While some admired her intelligence, others found her boldness unsettling. But Caitlin didn't care much about what people thought. She believed in speaking her mind no matter the consequences. One crisp autumn afternoon, Caitlin was walking home from the library when she noticed two neighbors shouting at each other across their shared fence. The argument seemed to be over a tree branch that hung awkwardly between their yards. One neighbor accused the other of deliberately cutting down part of the branch, while the second neighbor denied any involvement. Voices grew louder, and soon, both were red-faced and gesturing wildly. A small crowd began to gather, curious about the commotion. Unable to resist, Caitlin stepped closer. "Maybe you should check local property laws," she suggested, her tone calm but firm. "If the branch crosses your boundary line, you might have rights to trim it." Her comment was meant to be helpful, a logical solution based on what she'd read in books, but one of the neighbors misinterpreted her words. "Are you mocking me?" the man snapped, turning his anger toward Caitlin. "Who do you think you are, acting like a lawyer?" Caught off guard, Caitlin tried to explain herself, but the damage was done. The man stormed off, muttering under his breath, while the other neighbor shot her a glare before retreating inside his house. Caitlin sighed, shaking her head. She hadn't intended to cause trouble. She just wanted to help. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd somehow crossed a line. The next morning, Caitlin received a summons to appear in court. Apparently, the angry neighbor had filed a complaint against her, accusing her of disorderly conduct and harassment. Confused and frustrated, Caitlin decided to attend the hearing, hoping to clear up the misunderstanding. She didn't bother hiring a lawyer. After all, how serious could this really be? When Caitlin arrived at the courthouse, she felt a mix of nervousness and irritation. The room was dimly lit, with rows of wooden benches and a raised platform, where the judge sat. As she waited for her case to be called, she observed the proceedings around her. People shuffled in and out, some crying, others whispering urgently to their attorneys. It was a world she'd only ever seen in movies or read about in books, yet here she was, smack in the middle of it. Finally, her name was announced, and Caitlin stepped forward. On the bench sat Judge Robert Hensley, a tall, stern-looking man in his late 50s. His piercing eyes scanned the courtroom, demanding respect from everyone present. When Caitlin approached, he glanced at her file briefly before addressing her. "So, Miss Clark," he began, his voice deep and authoritative, "you've been accused of disorderly conduct. What do you have to say for yourself?" Caitlin took a deep breath. "Your Honor, I was simply trying to offer advice. I wasn't mocking anyone. I was suggesting they look into property laws because it seemed like a legal issue." Judge Hensley raised an eyebrow. "And what makes you qualified to give legal advice?" Caitlin hesitated. She wasn't a lawyer, nor did she claim to be one, but she loved studying the law. It fascinated her. Before she could respond, the judge cut her off. "Miss Clark, regardless of your intentions, your actions caused unnecessary disruption. For that, I'm fining you $200. The fine felt unfair, but Caitlin bit her tongue. Arguing wouldn't change the judge's mind, so she nodded politely and said, "Thank you, Your Honor." Then she turned and walked out of the courtroom, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions. As Caitlin left, Judge Hensley leaned back in his chair, watching her go. There was something unusual about her demeanor. Calm, composed, almost unnervingly mature for someone her age. Most defendants would have protested or begged for leniency, but Caitlin accepted the ruling without a fight. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but something told him this young woman was more than she appeared to be. Over the following weeks, Caitlin paid her fine and tried to move on with her life. However, the incident stayed with her. She couldn't stop thinking about the judge's question. What makes you qualified to give legal advice? Truthfully, nothing official. Yet Caitlin had spent years teaching herself about the law. Growing up She devoured every book she could find on famous trials and landmark cases. She watched documentaries, listened to podcasts, and scoured online resources whenever she had free time. Law wasn't just a hobby for her, it was a passion. Despite her financial struggles, Caitlin dreamed of becoming a lawyer someday. Attending law school seemed impossible given her circumstances, but she refused to let that discourage her. Instead, she poured her energy into self-study, determined to learn as much as she could on her own. Her friends often teased her, calling her the future attorney, whenever she corrected them on grammar or explained complex legal concepts during conversations. To Caitlin, these moments weren't just playful banter, they were reminders of her ultimate goal. Meanwhile, Judge Hensley couldn't shake the memory of Caitlin Clark. Something about her intrigued him. Was it her confidence? Her quiet defiance? Or perhaps it was the way she carried herself, as if she belonged in a courtroom despite being completely out of place. Whatever it was, the judge found himself wondering what kind of person Caitlin truly was. One day, while presiding over another routine case, Judge Hensley spotted Caitlin sitting in the back of the courtroom. She wasn't there as a defendant this time, just a spectator. At first he assumed she was accompanying someone else, but when the session ended, she remained seated, flipping through a notebook and scribbling notes. Curious, the judge approached her. "You again," he said, his tone lighter than usual. "What brings you here?" Caitlin looked up, startled. "Oh, hi, Your Honor. I'm just observing." "Observing?" he repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Why?" "I'm interested in how the legal system works," she replied honestly. "I've always wanted to understand it better." Judge Hensley studied her face, searching for signs of insincerity, but all he saw was genuine curiosity. "Interesting," he murmured. "Well, feel free to stay as long as you like. Just don't disrupt the proceedings." Caitlin smiled faintly. "Thank you, Your Honor." As the judge returned to his chambers, he couldn't help but wonder, could Caitlin Clark be more than just a curious bystander? Little did he know, their paths were destined to cross again, and in ways neither of them could have anticipated. Over the next few weeks, Caitlin became a regular fixture in Judge Hensley's courtroom. She attended almost every session, sitting quietly in the back row with her notebook open on her lap. Her presence didn't go unnoticed. Court clerks whispered about her persistence, and even some lawyers began to recognize her face. To most, she seemed like just another curious observer, but Caitlin was anything but ordinary. Each day she arrived early, taking meticulous notes as cases unfolded before her. She paid close attention to how attorneys presented their arguments, how judges ruled on objections, and how evidence was weighed. Every detail fascinated her. At first, she focused on smaller disputes, traffic violations, landlord-tenant disagreements, minor criminal charges. But as time went on, she started attending more complex trials involving civil litigation or felony cases. The courtroom was her classroom, and she soaked up everything it had to offer. What struck Caitlin most was the human element of the legal system. Behind every case were real people with real emotions, families torn apart, friendships shattered, livelihoods at stake. Watching these stories unfold gave her a deeper appreciation for the power of the law. It wasn't just about rules and regulations, it was about fairness, justice, and finding solutions that balanced competing interests. This realization fueled her determination to master the intricacies of the legal world. One afternoon, during a particularly heated trial, Caitlin noticed something unusual. A young woman accused of shoplifting was struggling to defend herself, without a lawyer. The prosecutor aggressively questioned her, pointing out inconsistencies in her story. The defendant grew flustered, tears streaming down her face as she tried to explain why she hadn't stolen the items in question. Caitlin leaned forward, gripping her pen tightly. She wanted to jump up and shout, "That's not fair!" But she stayed seated, reminding herself that this wasn't her fight. Instead, she jotted down key points from the trial, the prosecution's arguments, the judge's reactions, and the gaps in the defendant's testimony. Later that evening, back in her tiny apartment, Caitlin replayed the scene in her mind. What could the defendant have done differently? How might a skilled attorney have turned the tide in her favor? These questions kept Caitlin awake late into the night, scribbling ideas in her notebook until her hand cramped. Her dedication didn't stop there. Between court visits, Caitlin spent hours poring over online resources, reading case studies, and watching video lectures. She joined free webinars hosted by legal experts, absorbing every word they said. When she couldn't afford textbooks, she borrowed them from the library or downloaded PDFs shared by law students online. Her makeshift study space, a cluttered desk surrounded by stacks of papers and highlighters, became her sanctuary. Friends teased her for spending so much time cooped up indoors, but Caitlin didn't care. She was building something important, a foundation for her future. Judge Hensley continued to keep an eye on Caitlin, though he rarely let on. He admired her discipline and focus, qualities he rarely saw in anyone, let alone someone her age. One day, after dismissing a case, he approached her again. "Still here, I see," he remarked, his tone casual but probing. "You must be getting quite the education." Caitlin looked up, startled. "Yes, Your Honor, I'm learning a lot." "Why all the interest in the law?" he asked, genuinely curious. "Most people your age are busy with parties or sports, not sitting in courtrooms." She hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. Finally, she said, "I've always been fascinated by it. The way laws shape our lives, it's incredible. I want to understand how it all works." The judge nodded thoughtfully. "It's not an easy path, you know. Law school is expensive, and the profession itself can be grueling." "I know," Caitlin replied softly. "But I think it's worth it. Even if I can't afford school right now, I'll find a way eventually." Her determination impressed Judge Hensley. He'd met plenty of ambitious young people over the years, but few possessed Caitlin's quiet resolve. Still, he wondered, was she just another dreamer, or did she have what it took to succeed? A few days later, Caitlin faced a dilemma. She'd received a letter inviting her to testify in a follow-up hearing related to the property dispute that had landed her in trouble. The neighbor who'd filed the original complaint against her wanted her to recount their argument under oath. Caitlin debated whether to comply. Testifying would mean revisiting an embarrassing chapter of her life, but avoiding it felt cowardly. In the end, duty won out. She decided to attend. When Caitlin entered the courtroom, she spotted Judge Hensley on the bench. His expression remained neutral, but she sensed curiosity in his gaze. As she took the stand, her heart pounded. The opposing lawyer fired questions at her, trying to paint her as confrontational and disrespectful. Caitlin answered carefully, choosing her words with precision. She described the events leading up to the argument, emphasizing her intention to help rather than provoke. At one point, the lawyer smirked. "Miss Clark, isn't it true that you offered unsolicited advice despite having no formal legal training?" "Yes," Caitlin admitted calmly, "but I believe knowledge shouldn't be restricted to professionals. Sometimes, ordinary people need guidance too." The courtroom fell silent. Even Judge Hensley raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued by her response. Though Caitlin's testimony didn't sway the outcome of the case, it left a lasting impression on everyone present, including the judge. After the hearing, Judge Hensley invited Caitlin to his chambers for a private conversation. It was a rare gesture, one that hinted at his growing respect for her. As they sat across from each other, he asked bluntly, "Why do you care so much about the law?" Caitlin paused, considering her answer. "Because it matters," she said finally. "Laws affect everyone, whether we realize it or not. They decide who gets justice and who doesn't. If I can make a difference, even a small one, I want to try." Her sincerity moved him. For years, Judge Hensley had grown cynical about the legal system, frustrated by its flaws and inefficiencies. Yet here was Caitlin, full of hope and idealism, determined to improve it. Perhaps, he thought, she represented exactly what the profession needed: fresh perspectives and unwavering passion. Inspired, Judge Hensley made an unexpected offer. "Listen, Miss Clark," he began, leaning forward slightly. I don't usually do this, but I'd like to mentor you. You clearly have potential, and I'd hate to see it wasted. If you're serious about pursuing law, I can guide you through the basics, introduce you to contacts, maybe even help you secure an internship. Caitlin stared at him, stunned. Are you serious? Dead serious, he replied with a faint smile. But only if you're willing to put in the work. This won't be easy. Tears welled up in Caitlin's eyes. She'd dreamed of opportunities like this, but never imagined they'd come from the very man who had fined her months earlier. Thank you, Your Honor, she whispered. I won't let you down. And just like that, Caitlin's journey took a dramatic turn. With Judge Hensley's support, she dove headfirst into the legal world, eager to prove herself worthy of his faith. Little did she know, this partnership would lead to discoveries neither of them could have foreseen. Caitlin's life changed almost overnight after Judge Hensley offered to mentor her. At first, she struggled to balance her college coursework with the new responsibilities he assigned her. Every evening, instead of relaxing or hanging out with friends, Caitlin found herself poring over legal documents and case files in the judge's chambers. He started small, giving her simple tasks like organizing evidence for upcoming trials or summarizing key points from court transcripts. But as weeks turned into months, his assignments grew more challenging and more rewarding. One of Caitlin's earliest projects involved researching a complex zoning dispute that had stalled development in their town for years. The case pitted local business owners against environmental activists who claimed the proposed construction would harm nearby wildlife habitats. Judge Hensley handed Caitlin a thick folder filled with reports, petitions, and expert testimonies. Read through this, he instructed, then tell me what you think is missing. Caitlin spent hours dissecting the material, highlighting inconsistencies and noting gaps in logic. When she presented her findings to the judge, she pointed out how neither side had fully addressed the long-term economic impact on the community. If we're going to make a fair decision, she argued, we need to consider not just the environment, but also the people who rely on these businesses for jobs. Judge Hensley nodded approvingly. Good catch, he said. Now write it up. Make your argument clear and concise. For Caitlin, this was both thrilling and terrifying. Writing legal briefs wasn't something she'd ever done before, but she threw herself into the task with determination. She studied examples online, mimicking their structure while adding her own insights. When she finally submitted her draft to the judge, she braced herself for criticism. Instead, he smiled faintly and said, "Not bad for a beginner. Keep going." Encouraged by his praise, Caitlin began tackling bigger challenges. She assisted Judge Hensley in preparing arguments for appellate courts, analyzing statutes, and even drafting memos for other judges in the courthouse. Her work ethic impressed everyone around her. Lawyers who once dismissed her as a curious bystander now sought her advice, marveling at her ability to simplify complicated legal jargon. Even seasoned clerks admitted they learned a thing or two from her fresh perspective. But Caitlin's growth wasn't limited to practical skills. She also developed confidence. Standing beside Judge Hensley, watching him navigate tough decisions, taught her the importance of staying calm under pressure. She learned to listen carefully, ask thoughtful questions, and trust her instincts. Slowly but surely, she transformed from a self-taught enthusiast into someone who genuinely understood the nuances of the law. Despite her progress, Caitlin still faced obstacles. Financial struggles weighed heavily on her mind. While Judge Hensley's mentorship opened doors, it couldn't erase the reality of her circumstances. Law school remained an unreachable dream without scholarships or financial aid. Caitlin often stayed up late, calculating tuition costs and wondering if she'd ever afford such an education. Some nights, doubt crept in. Was all her hard work pointless if she couldn't take the next step? Judge Hensley noticed her frustration during one of their sessions. "You seem distracted," he remarked, glancing up from a file. "What's on your mind?" Caitlin hesitated, then confessed her fears about the future. "I don't know how I'll get into law school," she admitted. "Even with your help, I can't pay for it. And I'm scared I'll lose everything I've worked for." The judge leaned back in his chair, studying her closely. After a moment, he said, "Have you considered moot court competitions? They're a great way to showcase your talent and win scholarships." Moot court competitions were mock trial, events where students argued fictional cases in front of panels of judges. Winners often received cash prizes or full rides to prestigious law schools. Caitlin had heard of them but never thought she'd qualify. "I'm not even in law school yet," she protested. "How could I compete against actual students?" "Because you're better than most of them," Judge Hensley replied firmly. "Don't sell yourself short. If you prepare properly, you'll blow them out of the water." His confidence buoyed her spirits. With his encouragement, Caitlin decided to enter a regional competition hosted by a nearby university. For weeks, she practiced tirelessly, rehearsing opening statements and cross-examinations until her voice grew hoarse. Judge Hensley acted as her coach, critiquing her performance and offering tips to sharpen her delivery. "Pace yourself," he advised during one session. "Jurors don't care how smart you are, they care if they can follow you." Finally, the day of the competition arrived. Caitlin stood nervously outside the lecture hall, clutching her notes. Inside, teams from top universities buzzed with excitement, dressed in polished suits and armed with binders full of research. Caitlin felt out of place in her second-hand blazer and scuffed shoes, but she reminded herself why she was there: to prove that passion mattered more than privilege. When her turn came, Caitlin stepped onto the stage. The panel of judges scrutinized, her every move peppering her with tough questions designed to trip her up. But Caitlin held her ground, delivering her arguments with clarity and conviction. By the time she finished, the room was silent, a sign she'd made an impression. Later that evening, the winners were announced. Caitlin barely dared to hope as names were read aloud. Then, to her astonishment, hers was called, not just for third or second place, but for first. Tears welled up in her eyes as applause erupted around her. Judge Hensley beamed proudly from the audience, knowing this victory was only the beginning. Word of Caitlin's success spread quickly. Local newspapers ran stories about the self-taught, legal prodigy who beat Ivy League competitors. Lawyers approached her at networking events, eager to shake her hand and exchange business cards. One prominent attorney even offered her a summer internship at his firm. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from Professor Margaret Ellis, a renowned constitutional law expert who happened to attend the competition. Professor Ellis approached Caitlin after the ceremony, introducing herself with a warm smile. "That was one of the best performances I've ever seen," she said. "Where are you planning to go to law school?" I haven't figured that out yet," Caitlin stammered, caught off guard. "Well, let me make it easier for you," Professor Ellis replied. "My university offers a full scholarship to exceptional candidates. Based on what I saw today, you're exactly the kind of student we want. Would you be interested?" Caitlin's heart raced. A full scholarship? It sounded too good to be true. "Yes," she whispered, barely able to contain her excitement. "Of course." As Caitlin accepted the offer, she realized her journey was far from over. Each milestone brought new challenges, but also new opportunities. With Judge Hensley's guidance and her own relentless drive, she was proving that dreams could become reality, even for someone from a small town with big aspirations. Yet as Caitlin prepared to leave for law school, she faced another dilemma. Leaving meant saying goodbye to the community that had shaped her, including Judge Hensley. Though grateful for his support, she worried about stepping away from the foundation he'd helped her build. Could she succeed on her own, or would she crumble under the weight of higher expectations? Only time would tell. But one thing was certain. Caitlin Clark was no longer the same person who'd walked into that courtroom months ago. She was ready to embrace whatever came next, with courage, determination, and an unshakable belief in justice. Caitlin's decision to accept the full scholarship offer from Professor Margaret Ellis's university marked a turning point in her life. It was both exhilarating and terrifying, a chance to step into a world she had only dreamed of, but also a leap into the unknown. For weeks leading up to her departure, Caitlin wrestled with conflicting emotions. On one hand, she felt immense gratitude for the opportunities ahead. On the other, she couldn't ignore the pang of guilt that came with leaving behind the people who had supported her, especially Judge Hensley. The day before she left for law school, Caitlin visited the courthouse one last time. She found Judge Hensley in his chambers going over paperwork as usual. When he looked up and saw her standing there, his expression softened. "Well," he said with a faint smile, "this is it, isn't it?" Caitlin nodded, clutching the strap of her bag tightly. "Yes, Your Honor, I just wanted to say thank you for everything." The judge set down his pen and gestured for her to sit. "You don't need to thank me," he replied gruffly, though his eyes betrayed a hint of emotion. "You're the one who did all the work. I merely pointed you in the right direction." "That's not true," Caitlin insisted, her voice trembling slightly. "If it weren't for you, I wouldn't be here. You believed in me when no one else did, even when I doubted myself." Judge Hensley leaned back in his chair, studying her for a moment. "Caitlin," he began, his tone unusually gentle, "you have a gift. Not everyone sees the law the way you do. You care, not just about winning cases, but about making things fair. That's rare, and it's something this profession desperately needs." His words brought tears to Caitlin's eyes. She had always admired Judge Hensley's wisdom and integrity, but hearing him speak so candidly touched her deeply. "I'll miss working with you," she admitted softly. "This place feels like home." "It'll still be here when you come back," he assured her. "Besides, you've got bigger things waiting for you now. Don't look back. Just keep moving forward." With those parting words, Caitlin hugged him, a gesture that surprised them both, and walked out of the courthouse for the last time. As she drove away, she glanced at the rearview mirror, watching the familiar building fade into the distance. Though her heart ached, she reminded herself of what lay ahead, a chance to grow, to learn, and to make a real difference. Law school proved to be every bit as challenging as Caitlin had imagined, and then some. The first semester was a whirlwind of lectures, readings, and assignments that left her exhausted. Unlike her peers who had spent years preparing for this moment, Caitlin often felt like she was playing catch-up. Many of her classmates came from privileged backgrounds, having attended elite prep schools and prestigious undergraduate programs. They spoke confidently in class discussions, quoting legal theories Caitlin had never heard of. At times, she wondered if she truly belonged, but Caitlin refused to let self-doubt hold her back. Every morning she woke up early to review notes and prepare for classes. In the evenings she stayed late in the library, poring over textbooks until her eyes blurred. Her professors quickly noticed her dedication. One of them, Professor Ellis, took a special interest in Caitlin's progress. "You remind me of myself when I was your age," she told Caitlin during office hours. "Hungry, determined, and unafraid to ask questions. Don't lose that spark." Professor Ellis became a mentor to Caitlin, much like Judge Hensley had been. She introduced Caitlin to influential figures in the legal community, invited her to join study groups, and encouraged her to apply for internships. Under her guidance, Caitlin began to find her footing. By the end of her first year, she ranked among the top students in her class, an achievement that earned her respect from even the most skeptical classmates. Still, law school wasn't without its challenges. Competition among students was fierce, and Caitlin often found herself at odds with peers who prioritized grades over collaboration. There were days when she questioned whether she could keep up, when the pressure threatened to overwhelm her. But whenever doubt crept in, she remembered Judge Hensley's advice: keep moving forward. Those 4 words became her mantra, pushing her through the toughest moments. One of the highlights of Caitlin's second year was participating in a national moot court competition. Representing her university, she traveled to Washington, D.C., where teams from across the country gathered to argue a simulated Supreme Court case. This time, Caitlin entered the competition with confidence, drawing on her previous experience and the skills she'd honed in law school. Her arguments were sharp, her delivery polished, and her understanding of the law unparalleled. During the final round, Caitlin faced off against a team from Harvard Law School, widely regarded as the best in the nation. The opposing counsel was articulate and well-prepared, but Caitlin matched them point for point. When the judges announced her team as the winners, the room erupted in applause. Caitlin stood frozen for a moment, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she'd achieved. She thought of Judge Hensley and how proud he would be. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that she might actually belong in this world. The victory opened doors Caitlin hadn't dared to dream of. Law firms began reaching out, offering summer associate positions and promising lucrative job prospects after graduation. Judges invited her to clerk for them, recognizing her potential to excel in any role she chose. Yet, despite the attention, Caitlin remained grounded. She knew success wasn't just about accolades, it was about using her skills to help others. As graduation approached, Caitlin faced another crossroads. Offers poured in from prestigious firms in major cities, each more enticing than the last. But none of them felt quite right. Deep down, she longed to return to her roots, to use her education to serve the kind of people she'd grown up alongside. After much deliberation, she accepted a position at a non-profit organization dedicated to providing free legal aid to underserved communities. When Caitlin shared her decision with Professor Ellis, the older woman smiled knowingly. "Some people chase money or power," she said, "but you're chasing justice, and that makes all the difference." On the day of her graduation, Caitlin delivered the valedictorian speech. Standing before hundreds of students, faculty members, and family members, she reflected on her journey, the struggles, the triumphs, and the lessons she'd learned along the way. "None of us got here alone," she said, her voice steady and heartfelt. "We owe our success to the people who believed in us, even when we didn't believe in ourselves. So, as we step into the future, let's remember to pay it forward, to lift others up the way we've been lifted." Her words resonated deeply with the audience, earning a standing ovation. Among the crowd sat Judge Hensley, who had traveled hours to attend the ceremony. As Caitlin descended from the stage, he greeted her with a proud grin. "Well done," he said simply, pulling her into another hug. In that moment, Caitlin realized how far she'd come and how much farther she could go. With her degree in hand and a lifetime of purpose ahead, she was ready to take on the world. Whatever challenges awaited, she knew she wouldn't face them alone. Caitlin's journey into the professional world began with a mix of excitement and uncertainty. Her decision to join a nonprofit organization focused on providing free legal aid was met with admiration by many, but it also came with its own set of challenges. The nonprofit operated out of a modest office in a bustling urban neighborhood, serving clients who often had no other place to turn for help. From day one, Caitlin threw herself into her work, determined to make an impact. Her first few weeks were overwhelming. The caseload was heavy, and the issues ranged from landlord disputes to immigration matters, domestic violence cases, and wrongful evictions. Many of her clients spoke little English or had never interacted with the legal system before. They came to her scared, frustrated, and desperate for answers, Caitlin quickly realized that being a good lawyer wasn't just about knowing the law. It was about listening, empathizing, and guiding people through their darkest moments. One of her earliest cases involved a single mother named Maria, who was facing eviction after falling behind on rent due to medical bills. When Caitlin met her, Maria was visibly shaken, clutching her young daughter's hand tightly as tears streamed down her face. "I don't know what I'll do if we lose our home," she whispered. "My baby needs stability." Caitlin promised to do everything she could to help. She spent countless hours reviewing Maria's lease agreement, gathering evidence of her financial hardship, and negotiating with the landlord's attorney. At first, the landlord refused to budge, insisting that Maria had violated the terms of her contract. But Caitlin didn't give up. Drawing on her knowledge of tenant rights, she presented a compelling case at a mediation hearing, arguing that Maria deserved leniency given her circumstances. When the mediator ruled in Maria's favor, allowing her to stay in the apartment while setting up a manageable payment plan, Caitlin felt a surge of pride. Seeing the relief wash over, Maria's face reaffirmed why she'd chosen this path. "Thank you," Maria said, hugging Caitlin tightly. "You saved us." Moments like these fueled Caitlin's passion for justice, yet not every case ended so positively. Some battles were harder to win, leaving her drained and disheartened. There were days when she questioned whether she could truly make a difference against systemic inequalities and bureaucratic red tape. But she reminded herself of Judge Hensley's words, "Keep moving forward." Each small victory mattered, even if it didn't feel monumental at the time. As months passed, Caitlin's reputation grew within the community. Word spread about the young lawyer who fought tirelessly for those without a voice. People started seeking her out specifically, trusting her to handle their most sensitive and complex cases. Her colleagues admired her dedication, though some warned her about burnout. "You can't save everyone," one senior attorney cautioned. "Sometimes you have to let go." But letting go wasn't easy for Caitlin. She carried each case with her, replaying conversations in her mind long after leaving the office. Sleepless nights became common as she wrestled with decisions and outcomes. Despite the toll it took on her, she refused to compromise her commitment to her clients. For Caitlin, this wasn't just a job, it was a calling. Her growing influence caught the attention of local media outlets, which began covering her work. A reporter from a prominent newspaper wrote a feature article titled, "The Prodigy Lawyer Giving Back to Her Community." The piece highlighted Caitlin's unconventional rise, from a self-taught enthusiast to a trailblazer in the legal field. It described her as someone who bridged the gap between complex laws and ordinary people, making justice accessible to all. The article brought unexpected attention. Calls flooded into the nonprofit, not only from potential clients but also from donors eager to support their mission. Suddenly, Caitlin found herself juggling interviews, public speaking engagements, and fundraising events alongside her regular duties. While grateful for the exposure, she worried it might distract her from her primary goal, helping those in need. Judge Hensley, now retired, kept tabs on Caitlin's progress through news updates and occasional phone calls. He marveled at how much she'd accomplished in such a short time. One evening, he invited her to dinner at his home, a rare gesture he reserved for people he deeply respected. Over plates of homemade lasagna, they talked about her experiences since leaving law school. "You've done incredible things, Caitlin," Judge Hensley said, raising his glass in a toast. "But tell me honestly, how are you holding up?" Caitlin hesitated, unsure how to answer. Finally, she admitted, "It's hard, Your Honor. Some days I feel like I'm drowning. There's so much need and I can't fix everything. But then I remember why I started and it keeps me going." The judge nodded thoughtfully. "It's okay to feel overwhelmed. What's important is that you're doing something meaningful. Just don't forget to take care of yourself too." His advice stayed with Caitlin long after the meal ended. For the first time, she allowed herself to acknowledge the weight of her responsibilities and the importance of balancing them with self-care. She began setting boundaries, delegating tasks to coworkers, and carving out time for hobbies she'd neglected, like painting and hiking. Slowly, she found equilibrium, learning to thrive rather than merely survive. Caitlin's efforts eventually led to a landmark case that would define her career. A group of factory workers approached her, alleging unsafe working conditions and illegal wage deductions by their employer. The company, a major corporation with deep pockets, had ignored complaints for years, dismissing them as baseless grievances. Most lawyers avoided taking on such powerful opponents, fearing retaliation or failure. But Caitlin saw an opportunity to challenge injustice head-on. She spent months preparing the case, interviewing workers, collecting evidence, and researching labor laws. Her strategy was meticulous, anticipating every counter-argument the defense might raise. When the trial finally began, Caitlin stood confidently before the judge, delivering her opening statement with clarity and conviction. "This isn't just about wages or safety protocols," she declared. "It's about dignity. These workers deserve to be treated fairly, for their rights to be respected." The courtroom buzzed with tension as Caitlin cross-examined witnesses and dismantled the defense's arguments. By the end of the trial, it was clear she had made a compelling case. The judge ruled in favor of the workers, ordering the company to pay substantial damages and implement sweeping reforms. Cheers erupted in the gallery as the verdict was announced, with workers embracing Caitlin in gratitude. News of the victory spread nationwide, earning Caitlin widespread acclaim. Legal scholars praised her tenacity and skill, while advocacy groups hailed her as a champion for workers' rights. Invitations poured in, from prestigious conferences, universities, and organizations eager to hear her speak. Yet despite the accolades, Caitlin remained humble. "This win belongs to the workers," she told reporters. "They're the real heroes." As Caitlin reflected on her journey, she realized how much she'd grown, not just professionally but personally. She had transformed from a curious college student sitting in a courtroom to a respected figure fighting for justice on a national stage. Along the way, she had inspired countless others, proving that determination and compassion could overcome even the toughest obstacles. Still, Caitlin knew her work was far from finished. Injustice existed everywhere, and there were always more battles to fight. With renewed purpose, she vowed to continue pushing boundaries, challenging norms, and advocating for those who couldn't advocate for themselves. And somewhere in the background, watching proudly, was Judge Hensley, reminding her that her story was still being written. Years passed, and Caitlin Clark's name became synonymous with courage, resilience, and justice. Her journey from a small-town college student to a national legal icon inspired countless people across the country. She had faced challenges that would have broken others, yet she emerged stronger each time, driven by an unwavering belief in fairness and equality. But for Caitlin, success wasn't measured by headlines or awards. It was about the lives she touched and the changes she helped create. Caitlin's landmark victory in the factory workers' case opened doors she never imagined. Invitations to speak at prestigious events poured in, including TED Talks, international conferences, and university commencements. At first, Caitlin hesitated to accept these opportunities, fearing they might distract her from her nonprofit work. However, Judge Hensley encouraged her to embrace them. "You're not just representing yourself," he reminded her. "You're representing everyone who believes in justice. Use your platform wisely." Taking his advice to heart, Caitlin began traveling extensively, sharing her story and advocating for systemic reforms. She spoke passionately about the importance of accessible legal aid, equitable labor laws, and policies that protected vulnerable communities. Her speeches resonated deeply with audiences, blending personal anecdotes with calls to action. "Justice shouldn't be a privilege reserved for the wealthy," she often said. "It should be a right available to all." One of her most memorable appearances was at a global human rights summit in Geneva. Standing on stage before world leaders and activists, Caitlin delivered a powerful address about the intersection of law and morality. "Laws are tools," she declared. "They can either build bridges or walls. It's up to us to decide how we use them." The speech earned a standing ovation and cemented her status as a leading voice in the fight for social change. Despite her growing fame, Caitlin remained grounded. She continued working at the nonprofit, ensuring her roots stayed firmly planted in the community that shaped her. Every morning she arrived at the office early, ready to tackle whatever challenges awaited. Whether it was helping a family avoid eviction or guiding a young immigrant through citizenship paperwork, Caitlin approached every task with the same dedication she'd shown since day one. Her humility endeared her to colleagues and clients alike. Many marveled at how someone so accomplished could remain so approachable. "She doesn't act like a celebrity," one coworker remarked. "She treats everyone with respect, no matter who they are." As Caitlin's influence expanded, so did her ambitions. She founded a new initiative called Justice for All, aimed at training aspiring lawyers from underserved backgrounds. The program offered scholarships, mentorship, and hands-on experience to students who might otherwise struggle to enter the legal field. Caitlin drew inspiration from her own struggles, remembering how difficult it had been to navigate law school without financial support or connections. The launch of Justice for All coincided with Caitlin's 10-year reunion at her law school. Returning to campus brought back a flood of memories, Late-night study sessions, nerve-wracking moot court competitions, and the friendships that had sustained her during tough times. As she walked through the familiar halls, she felt a deep sense of gratitude for the path she'd traveled. During the reunion dinner, Caitlin delivered a keynote speech reflecting on her journey. "When I started law school, I didn't know if I belonged," she confessed. "I felt like an outsider, a kid from a small town trying to fit into a world that seemed so far removed from my reality. But what I learned is this: belonging isn't about where you come from. It's about the impact you choose to make." Her words moved many in the audience, especially younger students who saw themselves in her story. After the event, dozens of attendees lined up to thank her, some even asking for advice on pursuing careers in public interest law. Caitlin spent hours speaking with them, offering guidance and encouragement. To her, there was nothing more rewarding than seeing the next generation step up to carry the torch. Judge Hensley followed Caitlin's achievements closely, though he rarely mentioned them directly. Now in his late 60s, he spent most of his retirement gardening and reading, occasionally attending local court hearings out of habit. But whenever Caitlin visited him, he couldn't resist teasing her about her newfound celebrity status. "So, Miss Famous Lawyer," he'd say with a twinkle in his eye, "when are you running for office?" Caitlin would laugh, brushing off the idea. Politics wasn't her calling, at least not yet. For now, she was content focusing on grassroots efforts and mentoring future advocates. Still, she appreciated the judge's humor, knowing it came from a place of pride. Their bond had only grown stronger over the years, evolving from mentor-mentee to something resembling family. On one visit, Caitlin surprised the judge with a framed photo of them together at her graduation. "For your garden shed," she joked, handing it to him. "In case you forget what I look like." The judge chuckled, examining the picture fondly. "As if I could forget," he replied. Then after a pause, he added softly, "You've done good, Caitlin. Better than I ever imagined." Tears welled up in Caitlin's eyes. Though she'd received countless accolades, none meant as much as those simple words from the man who had believed in her when no one else did. Caitlin's legacy extended beyond her professional accomplishments. She became a role model for young women everywhere, proving that intelligence, determination, and kindness could overcome any obstacle. Schools named scholarships after her, libraries hosted exhibits celebrating her work, and filmmakers approached her about turning her life into a documentary. While flattered, Caitlin declined most offers, preferring to focus on her mission rather than personal glory. Her greatest joy came from witnessing the ripple effects of her efforts. Former mentees from Justice for All went on to lead their own initiatives, tackling issues ranging from environmental justice to criminal reform. One graduate even opened a free legal clinic in a rural area, inspired by Caitlin's example. Seeing others take up the mantle filled her with hope for the future. Yet Caitlin never forgot where it all began. The tiny courtroom where Judge Hensley had fined her, sparking a chain reaction that changed her life forever. On the anniversary of her first appearance there, Caitlin returned to the courthouse bringing flowers to leave at the entrance. As she stood outside, watching people hurry in and out, she reflected on how far she'd come, and how much farther she still hoped to go. A young girl passing by stopped to stare at Caitlin, recognizing her from TV. "Are you really Caitlin Clark?" the child asked shyly. Caitlin knelt down, smiling warmly. "Yes, I am. And maybe someday you'll do great things too." The girl beamed, clutching her mother's hand tightly as they walked away. In that moment, Caitlin realized her true purpose: to inspire others to dream bigger, fight harder, and believe in the power of justice. Years later, when historians wrote about Caitlin Clark, they described her as a trailblazer who redefined what it meant to be a lawyer. But to those who knew her best, she was simply Caitlin, a woman who cared deeply, worked tirelessly, and refused to give up no matter the odds. And as long as there were people willing to stand up for what was right, her story would continue to inspire generations to come.